Hello everyone and welcome to our webinar today, which is entitled Remote Management Tips for Supporting Your Team. And we have John from Jolin Consulting based over at Jurien Bay. He is here to present to us, and the couple of days ago he presented a really good webinar on remote working, and I'd encourage you to have a look on our website for the link to that webinar so that you can watch it at your desk and also your team members can watch it. So without further ado, I will pass you over to John.
Right, thank you, Caroline, and thank you for the opportunity once again of supporting your members. Just by way of intro, in terms of my 26 years or plus in HR services, I spent quite a number of years as a member of a business association. So I have a very strong appreciation of what this can do for members. Most of those years I spent on the executive, both in roles of secretary and then vice president. And that's probably why I'm a bit passionate about being able to offer something here. And I hope you will gain something from this, because this is called Remote Management Tips for Supporting Your Team. Now, we're in times of uncertainty, and there's no doubt about that. And remote management for people, this COVID-19 is actually causing some unique challenges. And knowing how effectively manage your team from afar is a skill that many global leaders, they're quite used to it. However, managers of local organisations and small businesses, they're very new to the job. They're actually learning on the job. And you people as small business owners and managers, I empathise with you. And I think it's important that what we've got to do is look at ways in which you can adjust your management of the workforce that's operating remotely. I mean, much of the stuff is written. It might seem simple, but the trick to all this is really commitment and execution. Now, I've given you out a sheet, a reflection sheet, to guide you through this. And once again, what I'd like you to do with that sheet is, as we cover a particular point, and I'm going to give you six points for supporting your team. So as I give you a point, you can use that sheet to sort of look at it and say, okay, yes, I'm doing that. Maybe I need to do this. What am I doing it? And then at the end of the sheet, I'd like you to go back and look at these particular points and work out what you're doing, what you need to change or what you need to hang on to, and then when you're going to do it or how you're going to do it. So in relation to that, what I'd like to do is give you these tips and pointers, and I've broken them down to 6. The first one will be about the importance of listening. So that's going to be in your number 1 box there. The second one will be on managing performance. And managing performance will bring up all sorts of issues, and there's no doubt about that. The third one is a different one. It's identifying conflict and possible bullying. And that's part of the reason why we're now in a particular environment of doing a lot on the web. The fourth one is recognising effort. And if you have ways that you do that already. The fifth one is virtual meetings. And I believe that even as COVID-19 changes us, we will still be having virtual meetings of some type. And the last one is assessing well-being. So it's not just promoting it, it's assessing it. So they're the 6 pointers. So I'm going to take you through them one by one, and we're going to look at some of the issues. So the first one, the importance of listening. Most business owners and leaders have never dealt with such a sudden shift. They're learning how to do their job differently, while at the same time, they're figuring out how to help the rest of us do ours. And it's quite interesting. So what is imperative here is the importance of you listening to what your people need. There's no doubt about that if you don't listen to what they need, you're just going to be throwing darts in the dark. So it's not about just giving your people an outlet. You have to give them a voice. This is some interesting research, because the research says that if you follow up on the feedback that you get from listening to them, you're going to actually have a higher level of engagement. So this particular graph that's there is companies that turn feedback into action do really well in getting engagement, and engagement contributes to the culture of your business. And I'll, at some stage or other, if we ever get into discussing culture and business, there's some interesting data around that as well. See, 39%, if they don't turn that feedback into action, well, it's really going to impact on the way in which your employees engage with you. That research, by the way, is 2020. It was a global employee experience trends. So I found that quite fascinating. However, during change, and turning this feedback in, but during change, the results show that people want leaders or managers to listen even more. So we're now in an environment that is really big. It's a big change for a lot of people. Our old way of listening, like having an engagement survey or things like that, is probably not suitable right now. All the results show that organisations that formally checked in with staff at least every quarter saw an engagement level of 63%. But if it came out to twice a year, it drops down by about 13%. So what we're saying here is that turning your feedback into action to promote that high engagement, and in changing environments, people want managers to listen even more. And so therefore, it's important that this is put in place. And by that feedback, if you're getting feedback on a monthly basis and you turn that into action, what is actually going to happen is the engagement is going to be significantly higher than even the 78% as indicated there. So the impact is not just now, it will impact for future and current staff meetings or team meetings or whatever you have. So that's your first one, the importance of listening. I'm going to give you 30 seconds or a little bit of time just to make any notes on your reflection sheet about what I've said there. And as previously, I will send you a summary of the 6 points so that you can look back and see and compare that with your current notes. Okay, so our next particular one is about managing performance. I'm going to pose a question. Should you expect the same level of performance from employees at the moment? Probably not so. Everyone is adjusting to this shocking new reality, and we have to give them time. So it's important that you as a manager or a leader understand that. And secondly, remember that this wasn't a planned situation. So when you ask people suddenly to work from home, you set up a work environment, etc., and some people have to organise babysitters, so you can continue to work as effectively as you would in the office. Unfortunately, right now, that's not the case. So business owners and managers might be managing people who are having to do a few hours of homeschooling before they can even start their day. So maybe you're only going to get about 50% productivity And managers have to adjust to that. There's no doubt about that. Not only will their performance temporarily shift, but also will their participation rates. You see, there are a couple of things about this as part of managing performance, and that is our work-life integration. And most of us have spent most of our time previously trying to get what we call work-life balance. Well, our work-life integration has suddenly moved to work-life overlap. Now, not necessarily in the quiet environment at home where you've got children. Some people have got their animals around, or there's more than one person in the house. So employees can sometimes feel highly anxious about a daily meeting or because of what they've got going on. Some of the people even commented there that, you know, you can have screaming babies or you can have nagging teenagers. I send my sympathy in both cases. But managers need to step in and be able to say something like, look, that's okay. We're all doing the best we can. And they need to make this imperfect way of working quite acceptable. So that's one thing there. The other part of it is, it's also important for managers to have some very clear conversations about output. If you're clear about what you've got to do, how you're going to do it, and the hours you're going to do it in, that's really secondary. But when you set clear boundaries for your staff, what you're doing is you're setting achievable tasks. There was a question put to me previously by your wonderful CEO, where people wanted to know, you know, should we have set hours and things like that? I still believe that the bigger organisations will probably do that. Smaller organisations, once again, need to be just fairly clear with the boundaries for staff. Remember, this is a tip to support them. So, and one of the things is if they know what they've got or what time they've got or what time they've got to achieve a particular task, they're probably going to work a lot better. So that is one particular area. However, normal performance issues, I think they'll arise. So, you know, a normal performance management issue won't arise. I think it will. There'll be some small proportion of workers who might use this time to probably slack off a bit, or perhaps they're already experiencing issues. Now, if this happens, you can reach for the regular tools such as performance management, or maybe we should be implementing new approaches. You know, if there are particular issues, possibly a performance re-engagement plan to get them back on the straight and narrow. But I think this has to be determined on a case by case. You might even feel that those who were previously underperforming wanted to step up and contribute more. And interesting, some of the research is saying people will do that, or some people, maybe a minority, will do it, could be out of fear of losing their jobs. So discretionary efforts can increase during a crisis time, or it could be a person would, you know, they might lift their game because they feel a sense of loyalty to the company, and particularly if the company have been supportive of them to succeed in a crisis. So the managing performance is a very important tip for managers in this current crisis. I'll give you, once again, a little bit of time to just note a couple of points down that you wanted to take away from that so that you can add that and reflect on it afterwards. I just need my little drink of water there, thank you. Okay, the third point is identifying conflict or bullying. Now, because we're dealing with the internet, look, the internet is always rife with bullying and harassment. But however, with more of us heading online to work, you could see an increase in this between staff members if you've got a number. And you would see it's really hard for managers, I suppose, to keep their eye on behaviour without having the victims speak up. I mean, if the victims don't speak up, it's going to be very difficult. So some forms of workplace bullying can be subtle and difficult to identify. There's a common term around that's called workplace gaslighting, where someone starts something and eventually it filters through. But if you consider the strange state of the world at the moment, people might be more likely to act out, especially those who are experiencing what we would term unprecedented levels of stress and anxiety. So just be aware of that. The other part of it to consider this about identifying conflict or bullying is that from a psychosocial perspective, we have to acknowledge that there are a number of people who go to work to escape home. Now, some people who either suffer from anxiety, depression, you know, they might use work as their downtime. And of course, there are some mental health issues important for managers to talk about those with individuals involved. What might be coming across as bullying or harassment might actually be the result of someone under a lot of stress or strain. Once again, the point is put there just for you to consider that, so you can preempt the situations by being open with your teams about the forms of communication. And the other part is that if you identify anything happening online where some of the messages that are going backwards and forwards might lead into this area, reminding people of this now and then, that, you know, we don't want to have to sing that song again, we're all in this together. But at the same time, people will need a gentle reminder. Sometimes, you know, in being open with your teams, that we're communicating through video and email. So let's be a little bit more accepting of people and give everyone a moment, the opportunity for them. So reminding people of this now and then is particularly valuable. You might want to make a couple of notes about that particular point, because it's something that has come up as a result of more of us going online. Okay, the fourth area is recognising effort in new ways. Now, employees can feel they're working in the shadows when they're not in the office. And that's an interesting thing. So it's nice for leaders occasionally to use a blanket statement acknowledging the efforts. But what about those smaller individual efforts that go unnoticed? You know, it's harder to detect the time and the effort, and sometimes the blood, sweat and tears that go into particular projects when you're not physically overseeing it. And that's an interesting thing. So when that's harder to detect, when 3 or 4 people are working on the same project, but they don't see the individual effort, whereas in an office and you're going around, you can actually see a lot of that. So it's important that instead of putting the pat on the back for staff, where managers have to come up with new approaches. You might want to start something like an Employee of the Week program. If you're going to call out a job well done in a virtual meeting, telling someone that, look, since the last meeting we had, so-and-so has actually produced this, which is of benefit to us, acknowledging that as well. And also creating maybe a specific online space for shouting out people's praises, whether you do it in a kind of a bulletin board or something like that. Because those kind of opportunities, for any of that to be effective, it's firstly important that managers put clear frameworks in place to help staff define what success looks like in this specific role. If they don't do that, employees will probably flounder during this time because they're unsure about what success looks like. And by that I mean that you have to sort of say, look, if we're going to have some kind of system of acknowledging people, let's work out and say, okay, well, what would that look like in terms of a successful project or a successful task? So the people are not just throwing out the compliments without any particular guidance. So you've got to help them, I suppose, clarify with them what success looks like. I don't think that we need to have what we call OKRs, the management of objectives and key results. You don't need to go down to that. But if you set a goal that's attached to a result and make sure it's easy to measure by the employees, and if the employees have helped you define that measure, well, then that's going to be quite impactful. So as this fourth point, I think is particularly important. And one of the reasons is that another program that we have offered in different groups in terms of interpersonal skills, we have there's a section there that's called specific affirmation. And a lot of the time that's impromptu. So when someone, a manager goes past someone or sees someone doing something that's really, really good, and they can impromptu say, oh, congratulations, so-and-so, I thought that was really terrific. Now, that's because you're in the situation, you're observing it. Whereas in this particular environment where people are working remotely, you don't get to see that. So that's why it is important, I suppose, to be able to give specific affirmation from a distance, but using a particular criteria. So I think that the amount of effort that you put into this is going to actually come back and reward you multiply. And I think it's worthwhile considering. So if you want to summarise a couple of points on your reflection sheet for that one, you can have the time now to do that. The fifth point, and as I've mentioned at the start, this is about virtual meetings. I'm quite passionate about the way in which people run meetings, and I want to put it from this particular perspective, and it's one of my favourite things. I always say that, look, if you have a meeting that goes for an hour and you've got 6 people in the meeting, consider this. If you sat down and worked out every person's hourly rate and put that together and said, okay, if we've got 6 people on these hourly rates, that's what it's costing us to have this meeting. If you do that sometimes, it's pretty scary. I've had organisations where fairly sizable ones, one in particular was a government organisation, another one a private company, and they worked out an hourly rate that was actually in the thousands of dollars. And therefore, if they had a meeting that wasn't effective, that was actually costing them big money. So the first point there is have a clear agenda for your meetings. It's a critical fact that in trying times, you need to have the people as productive as possible. And inefficient meetings are going to eat away at that productivity. So rather than putting out a whole lot of information for people to read, you also might want to make sure that what you're going to be putting out is that it's very clear to everyone about the direction, and people have an opportunity to put their concerns, because a virtual meeting is an opportunity to ask questions and seek understanding, because you're face to face, even though it's the ring. So if everyone's clear about the direction of the meeting, people have an opportunity to voice their concerns. So don't put the information as part of the meeting directly. Send it to them beforehand, give people a chance to read and reflect, so that when you do have the meeting, you've got a very clear agenda and people will know that they have that meeting to be able to voice their concerns and raise issues. The other thing you'd be encouraged to take the lead in setting up what we call non-work related gatherings online. There's some people I know, I've read about one organisation where a group of people come together at lunchtime. They have a lunchtime quiz just as a break from the routine. There are other people who've done virtual walking meetings, etc., so that you connect while doing other things. It's a bit like the organisation providing some social time as well, rather than just always being focused on the agenda. The other part I think it is important to understand here is that people operate differently. So it's important that all voices are heard. I'm a passionate promoter and developer of what we call personality type understanding. And I could actually show you a graph that if you had 10 people and you had 2 or 3 different personality types, the way in which they will engage in the meeting will be very much according to their personality. So if we understand that, firstly, that people operate differently, if you're running a meeting, you should provide an opportunity that all the voices are heard. Can information be disseminated beforehand? I think that's quite valuable, as mentioned above there, that you send out information, but it needs to be broken down into smaller chunks. Don't send out a wave of stuff and say, we've got our meeting coming up on Friday, you need to read this, and they've got so much else on their plate. The other thing is that if you understand that people operate differently, you can eliminate what I term the floor hoggers. And I think some of you may have seen in some particular methods, even Zoom, that can happen. So that brings us up to this choice of communication platform, which is crucial. In a Zoom meeting, sometimes the loudest people will get the most voice in that forum. And therefore you have to be aware of that. And I make that comment in concert with the previous one, that if you understand that some people operate differently, you may choose a platform that suits your people as opposed to another. So, but one little tip here is that you might want to get everyone to complete a feedback survey after a meeting. I'm also a bit passionate about this, because you're giving all people a chance to share their thoughts, and that feedback is treated equally, whether you do it with an online form or people put back. And people managers can ask at the end of their particular meetings, what was your experience like today in terms of our virtual meeting? And then go around the group. And someone might answer, you know, I feel I've had a lot of meetings. It's feeling hard to get my work done. Well, I'm finding it hard anyway. But you can talk about things that, how to adjust that. And I think, once again, virtual meetings are valuable. It's not just what we do, it's how we do it. And once again, managers need to understand that they need to take up the lead, but also they've got to be aware of the different personality types and too much information and unclear agendas. Otherwise, you're investing in technology just so that people can talk. And so I think it's a very, very valuable tip, this particular one. So if you want to make a few notes on that, feel free at the moment to add them to your sheet so that you can follow up at a time, etc., that's going to be suitable to you. Okay, let's go to number 6. And this is about awareness of well-being. There's much information at the moment about creating what we would call a mentally healthy workplace. And that's even before we got into this virtual lockdown. There are a lot of great online resources about how to support employees in a virtual world. But one of the things that you might want to do is consider setting up a strategy for how people check in. That's important because one of the things that you don't want is 3 different people check in with you within 10 minutes and then they don't hear anything for days on end. That in itself can sort of say, well, we've got it just a little bit out of balance. But at the same time, if you set up a strategy for the way in which people check in, that's part of your job as a manager to coordinate your approach. So a plan for how you'll support each person in the team. And if you link back that to my comments about personality type, but depending on the size of the organisation. Now, if you're running a fairly large organisation, and by that I mean maybe 10 or more employees, a direct manager might do a daily check-in. However, if it's a much smaller group, you might have a weekly check-in, and the idea of having cross-team check-ins that, you know, everyone is encouraged to check in with someone else. You'd also be able to pick up with that kind of situation, how your team is operating. Because if people feel as though their colleagues are checking on them, their managers checking on them, there's the care, there's the concern, and there's the support. And so that's going to contribute to the overall well-being of your team. The other thing that come out of that is that managers might check in with people that they're not used to speaking with. And that's a very positive thing, because a manager who doesn't normally see someone in their workplace because they work in another section, if they're checking in with them, you discover in your conversations that, you know, some people have particular talents that you weren't aware of, or you might find new resources amongst each other. And so there is an advantage. However, if the manager or leader takes the lead here in terms of this promotion of awareness of well-being, it will actually have a long-term impact for the people that you would, if you discover something like this, it's a sign that even at this stage that you are still prepared to keep in contact and support one another. And I think there are some long-term advantages of that. So if you want to make note of that particular area on your reflection sheet, that would be great. So they're the 6 points: the importance of listening, managing performance, identifying any conflict or bullying, recognising efforts in a new way, conducting your virtual meetings, and also highlighting the awareness of well-being. I think in these difficult times, it's important for managers to be able to think a bit differently and do things differently. There is going to be some possible changes that come as a result. And I've already been reading about possible changes in terms of HR, role descriptions, and the way in which people work their way forward, particularly in some organisations who are already finding that they've had an increase from certain of members of their staff or their employees in terms of the work they're getting through, because they don't have a lot of the distractions of the office, and that's a plus. So they're starting to think, well, maybe going forward for a couple of people, if we allow them to work in the office 3 days and 2 days at home, there may be some good balance there. So in summary of those, I just want to leave you with something to remember, and I think this is particularly important, and that is, this is a period of rapid change and flux, and we'll come out of it the other side. However, on this journey, we just need to be human with people as we go through. So I hope those particular points about tips to support your team while you're handling remote management are valuable. I would encourage you to use your reflection sheet, put down your ideas and plan how you're going to do it. And then, as promised at the start, I will send out a summary sheet so that you've got all those points down, and you can then do your own plan about what you need to do for your business. Once again, it's been a pleasure to share these thoughts with you, and I wish you all the best in your effort to manage your team remotely. And thank you very much.
Thanks very much, John. That was an excellent presentation, and I think your last quote there goes both ways. I think, you know, as managers, we have to be, we have to understand that there's a period of change and flux, as you've said there, and that we need to be human with people, but also employees need to recognise that it's, you know, a state of change, and they yes. also need to be considerate of managers trying to manage during this period of time. Goes both ways.
I think you're right on the money. Right on the money.
I was just going to ask you a question, John. Throughout that presentation, there was a common theme of always checking in with your staff and finding feedback mechanisms. If you were a trade-based business or an engineering business, what have you seen that works really well with those type of physical manual labour businesses? How do they check in with their staff? Do they do a toolbox meeting every couple of days, or what are some mechanisms they can do?
Look, I would agree with you, Caroline, about the toolbox meetings. They're, yeah, get rid of that fly.
I know.
They're actually, I shouldn't say underperformed, they're not maximised. And part of the reason is that they started predominantly in the construction and trades industries about safety. And so when they hold their toolbox meetings, in a lot of cases, they're there at the start to say, okay, this is the task we're on this week, and this is what we're going to do. I still believe that supervisors or people in those areas need to use that opportunity of clarifying the task, clarifying the goal, what we've got to do to get to there, but using the opportunity to also acknowledge, commend, identify, etc., people who are particular. It's part of that thing that I mentioned in that little, the point is there about specific affirmation. And it's one thing that's underused. And therefore, I believe that there is a difference there where you actually have encouragement of people by specifying the actual thing that they're doing. So in other words, if I had to say to you, well, that's a good job. But if I say to you, Caroline, when you did this, I was really impressed, and I think you did a very good job. Now, that's specific affirmation, and it's something managers and team leaders sometimes struggle with, because it's very easy to go down and say, oh, great job, so-and-so, etc. But if you specify what it is, it also puts it out there in the what I call the forum or the public. I have a personal little thing that I share with some of my coaching clients. I call it PIP and RIP. And PIP stands for praise in public, and RIP stands for reprimand in private.
Yeah. Good. Yeah. Yeah. That's very good.
Are we still recording?
Yeah, we are.
Right.
Yeah, that's okay. John, the other question I just wanted to ask you was, do you have any leading questions that you could pass on to managers when they are seeking feedback from their employees?
Yeah, I'll give some thought to that, and I'll pop a few things through to you, because I think, the big organisations spend a lot of money in doing these quarterly feedback things where you go online, blah, blah, blah. And they get the feedback, but unfortunately, it's kind of not personalised, and it's very hard. It's how much you're prepared to drill down. That little point that I made there where we're talking about the meetings, and also where we talked about even the importance of listening, about where you get input for future and current staff meetings. If you're asking people at the end of something, how do you think that goes? And people can give feedback. But I think you can frame up a couple of questions that we've used in terms of getting people to rate the performance of a particular process that you have in place, how effective it is, why it's effective, can we improve it? I have a standard worksheet that we handed out to the group who did the time management workshop, and it says about they have to tick, whether they enjoyed the session or not, but we have a couple of key questions. What helped your learning today? In other words, the first part is always, did we achieve, did you come away with the objectives that we set at the start about whether you understand this, that you're going to be given that. But then we ask, what helped your learning? And then the second one is, what hindered your learning? And the third one is, what changes need to be made? Now, I think even just using those, and I'll pop those down to you so that you can have a look at them, because I think if you include those kind of things, and if you've got to sort of say, okay, are we achieving this? Yes. What are we doing to achieve it? What's helping us achieve that? What's hindering us from achieving it? What changes do we need to make? Now, they're not academic questions or anything. They're very much what I call, gut-based questions. And if people are able to express that, you got a lot of feedback. And I can tell you now, just personally, from previous workshops, this is going back umpteen years, when we started a new program, we actually did an evaluation. It was 3 or 4 day programs. So I did an evaluation every day, and we collated them up from the 28 or 30 participants. And at night, I used to sit down and go through it, because there's no use at the end of the course people finding that your style of presentation or your style of working wasn't there. But by the time we got to the 4th day, I think we'd nailed everything. How did I know? Because they provided the feedback every day. Now, I'm not saying you need to do that every day, but at the same time, if you do this regularly, feedback, people like to know that they've had the opportunity of saying something. It's
Yeah.
the old
And
adage.
Yeah. Yeah, and they like to, the point in your presentation also was that you acted upon it.
Yes, yes. And the thing is that if people can see some change there as a result, I mean, that's considering your employees. I always say your employees are the resource that cost you the most. And therefore, if you've got a resource, it's like having a very expensive piece of plant on a farm. You don't just put it in the shed and just use it for this and that. You maintain it, you look after it, etc., because it's your key resource. In a lot of organisations, the people are the key resource. How often do you talk with them? How often do you engage with them, etc., etc.? And therefore, it's particularly important.
Yeah, I think that's a very good analogy, John. That's a very good analogy.
Well,
we will we'll leave the webinar there, and Wheatbelt businesses can get in contact with myself or you. This will be up on our website, and they can access the reflection sheets and worksheets as well. But thank you very much, John. That's very much appreciated.
Not a problem. It's great to be of service to your dynamic organisation.